2020 is halfway over and has offered up a litany of disappointments. It's interesting to consider how many games seemed like surefire things before launch and yet ended up either underwhelming, disappointing, or outright infuriating. Without further ado, let's take a look at the 15 most disappointing games of 2020 so far. WARCRAFT 3 Reforged. How do you possibly mess up a classic game like WARCRAFT 3? It's one thing to have a multitude of bugs, horrible multiplayer, an underwhelming UI, and an uneven graphics update. It's quite another to claim ownership over all the custom games with players not even getting credit, or outright lying about remastered cutscenes and presentation, or making it so that owners of the original had to update to Reforged, thus ruining their nostalgia as well, or a dozen other things that make you wonder how Blizzard got to this point. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX. Nintendo set expectations pretty high with Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX, with the visuals being remade from the ground up. However, despite the new mechanics and graphical update, many of the same issues from the original game remain. Dungeon design is repetitive and boring, the ability to choose the best possible move with a single button press removes any need for strategy, and many of the other gameplay systems feel uncompelling. So much more could have been done, but alas. Bleeding Edge. From its initial leak and subsequent reveal, Bleeding Edge seemed like a questionable decision. Even if you discount the fact that Ninja Theory is known more for its single-player games, would a 5v5 hero-based team brawler really find much appeal? Unfortunately, its betas and launch laid bare all of the core issues, from the lack of compelling combat to problematic map design and controls. Don't take our word for it, just look at the Steam user numbers with the all-time peak of just 828 players. Throughout my time playing Hunting Simulator 2, specific moments that stick out in my head are few and far between. The majority of my time was spent almost insubstantially, wandering around the empty environments hoping for an icon to pop up or for my dog to call me over to see an old pair of tracks. When I finally came across an animal and successfully hunted it the old-fashioned way, I was ecstatic to see the fruits of my labor, but too often I was made to feel like I was wasting my time, especially because I didn't have anything to work toward and could have gotten the same reward from running around and hoping for an animal to pop up randomly. For all of its positive instances, there are long stretches of tedium and monotony that make Hunting Simulator 2 a tough sell, even to experienced hunters. Resident Evil 3. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Resident Evil 3, a remake built from the ground up for current-gen hardware. It feels great to play, the visuals are stunning, and the new content, like the new Nemesis boss fights, are great. However, it cuts a lot of content from the original, from memorable set pieces to Mercenaries mode. Nemesis was also barely in it past the downtown section, and Resistance, the asymmetrical multiplayer mode, still isn't all that great. Considering how stellar the Resident Evil 2 remake was, Resident Evil 3 took several steps back. Mafia 2 Definitive Edition. Have you ever wanted a classic game to be remastered and actually play worse than the original? Judging by this year's trends, the answer definitely leans toward no, but that didn't stop whatever happened to Mafia 2 Definitive Edition. The improved texture treatment wasn't even, which leads to a visually inferior experience from the original, and the sheer number of bugs is crazy, from character models to missions glitching out. That's not even counting performance, which constantly suffers frame rate drops. Disintegration. Disintegration comes from Halo co-creator Marcus Leto and combines strategy and first-person shooting into an intriguing story. The gameplay oscillates between fun and messy, the story has pacing issues but likable characters, and the multiplayer is just kind of there, and probably already dead by the time you read this. It's not a horrible game per se, your mileage may vary of course, but given its ambition and the pedigree behind it, we expected a lot more. The Wonderful 101 Remastered. A Kickstarter campaign that smashed its funding goal with little trouble doesn't always result in an amazing product. The Wonderful 101 Remastered is a bit more complicated though. The original felt unjustly ignored back in the day, but it did have some glaring issues. 7 years later, and the PC remaster seems decent. However, the Nintendo Switch version is plagued with camera problems and frustrating touchscreen gameplay. Even the combat, often a hallmark of a Platinum Games title, is hit or miss. For all the game's charms, it definitely needed more work done to improve the core gameplay. Fallout 76 Wastelanders. For all the praise heaped on Wastelanders for the return of dialogue and reputation systems, human NPCs, and interesting stories, there is still a lot wrong. The way Fallout 76 is currently structured means that you'll need to slog through the base game's annoyances to actually get to the new content. It also doesn't help that a lot of the issues plaguing the game since launch, from the horrible combat and frame rate drops to bugs galore, still remain. Wastelanders may be worthwhile for hardcore players who can look past all that, but it's an incredibly tall order for anyone else. Rugby 20. Let's be honest. Nacon's Rugby games have been mixed at best and utter catastrophes at worst. Things seem to be looking up with Rugby 20, developed by Echo Software after a good 3-year gap from Rugby 18. It certainly improves on its predecessor in some gameplay aspects, but falters in its league seasons, My Squad mode, statistics tracking, and other obligatory features. The core of a fun game is there, which makes the lack of polish all the more disappointing. My Hero One's Justice 2. You'd think that a sequel would improve on the tenets of the original, but My Hero One's Justice 2 doesn't. The fighting system is repetitive, with annoying controls, enemy AI is poor, and even the camera has a multitude of issues. When you consider all the memorable moments that the anime had, and how the campaign could have exploited these to epic effect, the presentation also feels underwhelming. Keep in mind that this is coming from Bandai Namco, which pretty much owns the anime fighting game genre. WARLANDER. Despite having little to no expectations, the marketing blurbs for Clock Drive Games' WARLANDER sounded great. Precise combat with weapons that can slice right through enemies? Sure, why not? Unfortunately, everything that can go wrong in a game like this inevitably does. Terrible controls, dull visuals, unrewarding customization, unimaginative level design, and so on and so forth. AO Tennis 2. Big Ant Studios initially had our attention with AO Tennis 2. Players looked good, customization seems to be on point, and the amount of content looked like a step up from the original. What could possibly kill the experience? Poor controls for one, followed by unrealistic gameplay that lacks any real nuance or strategy, poor online multiplayer, and lackluster AI. Far from being an improvement over the original, AO Tennis 2 is just another non-EA Sports game that barely passes muster, which is saying a lot. Exit the Gungeon. I personally enjoyed Exit the Gungeon for what it was, a 2D platforming spin on the roguelike combat of Enter the Gungeon, so I can understand that fans of the original are disappointed by the lack of customization, especially when guns are doled out RNG style, and the bullet spongy nature of foes. While it's important to acknowledge this is a spin-off and not a full-fledged sequel, what is fun and does work only makes you wish for all of the synergy, secrets, and content of the original. Mafia 3 Definitive Edition. Remember when Hangar 13 remastered Mafia 2 and made it worse? Somehow, someway, it did the same for Mafia 3, which wasn't all that great to begin with. On top of including all the bugs, core issues related to animations, mission design, and enemy AI have yet to be resolved. Performance is worse, while the visual improvements are negligible at best. Hilariously enough, if you play the original version at 1440p on the PS4 Pro or 1728p on Xbox One X, these were removed with a Definitive Edition's launch, even more hilarious in retrospect since it hyped up full 4K support. Eventually, Hangar 13 would add them back in, but that doesn't make the overall product less of a disappointment. And that wraps it up. If you like what we are doing, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon. That way you will never miss out on any of our videos.